Welcome to our weekly Tanya class, and we are in the midst of a fascinating string of chapters, and we're almost to the end. We're at the second to last of this, not of the whole book, but of this string of chapters that runs from 18 through 25, and we're almost there. We're almost in the home stretch. We're about to have it all come together. All the pieces are about to fall into place. It's all going to make perfect sense very soon. If you just hang in there, don't abandon us. Just hang in there, and it's going to all pop into place. Okay. Let's just review. Chapter 18, we began to speak about a new method for arousing love and awe of Hashem. A new method meaning new in addition to what we had just learned in chapter 16 and 17, where he told us in 16 and 17, he said, if you want to love or revere God, if you want to have any emotion for that matter, how should you do it? Meditate. After that, we said, okay, fine, what if the meditation isn't working yet? He said, fine, I got a method for you. It'll work. You don't even have to be a seasoned meditator, but it takes me 8 chapters to explain it to you. And we were like, okay, we'll do it. And they're gruesome? And they're gruesome? In what sense do you mean they're gruesome?
Very technical.
Oh, very technical? Yeah, there is comparatively speaking, the technical Kabbalistic mechanics are more detailed than in other places in this book. That's true. And specifically, we're focusing on the technical mechanics of the principle of divine oneness. But we'll get there. Hold on. So chapter 18 comes along and says, listen, we have this historical phenomenon of irreligious Jews who sacrificed their lives to preserve their Jewish identity. What's up with that? And we answered and said, well, there's something embedded in the spiritual DNA. I don't mean genetic, biological DNA, but I mean proverbially the spiritual DNA of the neshama, which will not allow the Jewish soul to be separate from God. And that will be summoned at a time of intense threat to the connection to God. That's why that explains that phenomenon of Jews who are not observant throughout history who gave their lives willingly to preserve their Jewish identity. Chapter 19, we said that this impulse may be likened to the nature of a flame. That just like a flame wants to lose itself and return to its source, so too the soul, the neshama. I don't mean the vivifying soul that keeps your body alive. I mean the godly soul that gives you God consciousness. That soul is a very funny entity because contrary to the MO of basically everything else in the world, it does not seek self-preservation but self-annihilation through self-transcendence. It wants to become subsumed within the one. So it wants God consciousness. Actually, I shouldn't even say God consciousness because that implies a subjective relationship of a conscious observer. It wants to be in a state of oneness with God more than it wants to preserve its own existence. And if we can get that to be summoned, to be triggered, it will immediately align all of our emotions with God's will. So we proposed in chapter 20 a black and white, very binary way of viewing all of Torah as either connection or disconnection. That there's really only 2 mitzvos. Either you believe in God or you deny him. Chas v'sholom. Basically, it's a reduction where we simplify all of Torah into the first 2 of the 10 commandments. Everything I'm saying should sound familiar if you've been here. If you haven't been here, it shouldn't sound familiar, but it should sound like at least it basically makes sense. Even if you can't really follow, at least the words in combination with each other should form intelligible sentences. So, where are we heading? I told you already. Remember my disclaimer that I said 20 times? Yes, we are proposing a very black and white, all or nothing view of Judaism that we don't normally take on, but here, for this method, we do. So if you understand that it's either connection or disconnection, so that sort of will up the ante and trigger a more intense risk or a more intense reaction to what you perceive as a greater risk. What?
All or nothing.
All or nothing. In chapter 21, we spoke about the metaphor of divine speech, how really the creation is nothing. It doesn't exist. Just like a person's speech, a person speaks, his words don't have existence outside of him. So too, the creation doesn't have its own existence outside of Hashem. In chapter 22, we said, in fact, it's even more than the metaphor. The metaphor was profoundly limited. It's even more than that. In chapter 23, which is what we learned last week, we said, therefore, the ultimate oneness is through surrendering to God's will. And we spoke about two ways of surrendering to God's will, through Torah study and through mitzvah observance. And if you remember, those were two gradations or two levels. Mitzvah observance is like being a merkava, like being a chariot to God's will, being surrendered to God's will, like we gave the metaphor of the limb of the body, which automatically does the bidding of the person. Remember I had my cappuccino last week and I kept reaching for it? Okay, now I have my water. Got healthier. And then there's an even higher level of oneness where you learn Hashem's Torah and you align your thinking with Hashem's perspective of reality. And that's an even higher level. In either case, whether it's performing mitzvahs or studying Torah, and then we had that really good question about women's obligation to study Torah, which I hope was answered sufficiently. And then we basically finished. So in either case, the point of chapter 23 was that through doing Hashem's will, one becomes unified or united with the reality that Hashem really is the only reality. In chapter 24, we're going to say, and conversely, not to scare you, not to get negative, but there is a way of divorcing yourself from that reality. Yeah?
We didn't finish chapter 23, right?
Oh, did we not finish chapter 23?
No.
We stopped with through Torah and mitzvos you become one.
Oh, that's right. Continuing chapter 23. Continuing chapter 23. Yeah.
Where are we starting?
Umei acher sharotzin ha'alyin, right there.
Can you tell me the English?
And since or being that,
I got it.
you found? Okay.
Thank
Umei acher sharotzin ha'alyin am yuchad be'ensof baruch hu betachas ha'yichud hu begilu legamri v'loi behester ponim klal klal benefesh hu alakis. Ulevusha ha'panimim shem achshava v'dibura be'esa shah sha'adam esik b'divrei Torah. Now, we're describing the state of the person when he is learning Torah or doing mitzvahs. The Torah and the mitzvahs themselves constitute Hashem's innermost will. We've spoken about this concept before, about inner will and outer will, degrees of will. Sometimes there's an ulterior motive, something that you desire but only as a stepping stone. But the mitzvahs are Hashem's actual will. That we've spoken about this before, I believe, that when you ask somebody, well, why do you want it? If they have an answer why they want it, it's not their innermost will. Until you come to the thing where they say, just because, that's what I want. That's the innermost will. So Hashem desires everything in his world, or it wouldn't be there. But it doesn't mean it's his innermost will. It could be there for an ulterior motive. The mitzvahs constitute Hashem's innermost will. And when you are subsumed within that will by surrendering to it and being a vehicle to it, in the case of mitzvahs, or being aligned with it in the case of learning Torah, so then you are at one with Hashem's innermost will. Harei gam hanefesh ulevusheha elu Now he gets into the mechanics of it. So your soul and its garments, meaning your thought, speech, and action, become one with Hashem, with the Infinite One, at that moment, in the ultimate sense of oneness. Like the oneness of Hashem's thought and speech, or speech and thought, with his essence, as we mentioned above. Remember in chapters 20 and 21, where we use that metaphor that all created existence is really as naught as speech, the speech of a person. It doesn't have a separate existence from the person. Nothing is really separate from Hashem. It's only concealed. And in this case, when you're doing Hashem's will and surrendering to it, there is no concealment because it's overt. At that moment, your existence is aligned with Hashem's innermost will. So he's just describing the state of oneness that's achieved through choosing to learn Torah or do mitzvahs at any given moment. So far, so good.
You're saying we're never really separate,
We're never really separate.
but
But for all practical purposes, we create an experience of separation, which is the sin of idol worship. Furthermore, he says, the oneness that you achieve through doing mitzvahs is an even greater oneness with Hashem than exists in the upper worlds. We speak about different planes of reality, different levels, where each one is more transparent. The higher the world is, the more transparent it is. The word olam, ayin, vav, lamed, mem, is from the etymological three-letter root, ayin, lamed, mem, which means concealment. So the word for world, or here world probably is better translated to a plane of reality, is synonymous with the word concealment. Each plane of reality is another concealment, and they're compounding. So when we have a world upon a world, that's like if you put enough translucent fabric over the window, eventually it has the effect of being opaque. We live in the lowest world, meaning the final culminating concealment, where spirituality is pretty much completely hidden. The ultimate concealment. And then there are higher worlds, spiritual worlds, where spirituality is revealed, or more revealed. And the higher the world, the greater the revelation. And we just made a claim here that when you do a mitzvah or you learn Torah, your level of oneness with Hashem is actually greater than anything that's achieved in those higher worlds where spirituality is in greater revelation. And he explains. You understand the statement. Now, you don't have to understand how that's true because he didn't explain it yet, but you understand the statement? Okay. Now he explains how it's true. Because Hashem's will is literally revealed in that soul and in its garments when the person is learning Torah. Because Hashem's innermost will is the Torah itself. Whereas, in contradistinction, all of the higher worlds actually get their life force from the energy of the Torah. Torah is Hashem's will and wisdom, and like it says, you made them all in wisdom, meaning Torah is the energy with which all creation continues to exist. If so, what emerges? HaChochma sheyat Torah l'mayla mekulam. Chochma, wisdom, divine wisdom, which is Hashem's Torah, is higher than all the worlds. V'hi retzayni yisbarach hanikra seva kol almin, and that is Hashem's will, not just his wisdom, but his will, which is also called the encompassing force, too great to be contained. Shehi bechinas masha eina yachal islabish b'seich almin, something that's too lofty to be contained within creation, the finite creation. Rak mechaya umeir lamayla bechinas makiv. Rather, this lofty energy remains, so to speak. Obviously, we use the spatial terms only metaphorically. This energy remains outside of the system of finite reality. V'hi hamislabeshes benefesh levusheha bebechinas gilui mamish kisheis can be divided. And yet, that lofty energy, which is too great for the worlds to contain, even the spiritual worlds, is precisely what is invested within the person and his soul when he's learning Torah. So basically, what we said is the energy that is revealed in the spiritual worlds is only an energy that is capable of being invested within some system of reality. It's lofty, to be sure, but it's ultimately finite. The energy that we access when we are aligned with doing Hashem's will or learning about Hashem's will is an energy that's even greater than that, which normally cannot be contained within anything. It's too great to be contained. But yet that is precisely what we are united with when we are learning Hashem's wisdom and will.
So when you're doing a mitzvah,
Yeah.
let's say, and you want to channel it somewhere else, let's say you're learning L'zecher Nishma somebody, or Ben Neshama, or
Yeah.
you're learning for refuah for somebody. So how does that channel that other person?
We're not talking about your will. Is that what you're asking?
So
Your
does
intent?
Hashem, when you do something, so it benefits you,
Yeah.
Hashem. So Hashem to channel it to that,
Okay.
whatever you're doing that for.
Don't worry about that. Listen, no, seriously, because I don't have a month to do every chapter. Okay. Do you understand this radical claim that was just made?
Yeah.
Articulate it to me.
When you're doing a mitzvah, or,
Yeah.
or learning Torah, or doing
Yeah,
anything,
yeah.
so you're channeling, it goes to Hashem. It's by part of Hashem.
Yeah.
You're
As opposed to what?
well, anything you do. Hopefully
He's
you're
making
doing
a claim here. This is what I want everyone to understand. Don't worry about that question. I don't mean it to be dismissive. I mean it in the sense of being trying to be a helpful teacher to keep you focused, okay? Because there's many associations that we can make and then we end up far afield. Follow the claim that he just made. He said when you learn Torah, especially when you learn Torah, when you do mitzvahs as well, but right now he's focusing on learning Torah, you become one with Hashem. Okay, great.
Right.
It's a very inspiring idea. He says, no. Let me explain what that means. You think it's inspiring? Let me explain to you. You don't even understand half of it. Think about the higher worlds, spiritual worlds. Yes, I'm aware of the higher spiritual worlds. Yes, there's a great degree of spiritual revelation in those worlds. That's what makes them higher. He says, they cannot achieve the oneness with Hashem that a Jew down here, soul in body, can achieve by learning Torah. Why? Because the spiritual revelation in the higher worlds is categorically of a lower degree of energy, which is capable of being revealed. Something that can be revealed, as impressive as revelation is to us as observers, subjectively, by definition, it means that there's a limit to it, or it would be unobservable. Something that's so ubiquitous that it cannot be contained is no longer observable. It's like the fish who asked the other fish, do you believe in water? And the other fish said, what's water? Right? That's Soiviv Kol Alman. Soiviv Kol Alman is literally means the encompassing energy. So there's Memale Kol Alman, there's the energy that fills worlds. That's impressive stuff. You see how this energy, this creative energy, enters into the world and does stuff. And when it does it in a revealed way, it does cool stuff. And you're like, wow, look at that. Yeah, but precisely the fact that you're able to observe it means it's of a lower grade and category that is capable of investing itself within a finite framework, even a lofty spiritual finite framework. Then there's energy that cannot be contained. How do you have a relationship with that? So he says, well, you do it not by observing it, because it's too great to be observed. If you could observe it, it wouldn't be it. You do it by uniting with the ultimate observer, meaning Hashem. You unite your perspective of reality with his perspective of reality. And now instead of looking at God, you're looking with God. You understand? Instead of looking at some revelation of godliness, you are now taking the perspective of the divine observer. That's what Torah is. Torah is taking the perspective of the divine observer. You're looking at reality from Hashem's perspective.
By probing the Torah and his will.
Yeah, but right, Hashem's will and wisdom, which are the Torah, correct, which are contained within any halacha. You open up a Shulchan Aruch and you read how to get out of bed in the morning, and you're now observing from the divine observer's standpoint. Instead of looking at and beholding God, you are now looking along with God. That is the unity with Soivev that is possible through Torah study that you cannot get even if you were privy to all of the revelations of the spiritual worlds. Okay? We'll go boom, boom. Yeah?
Because we are in this world, we are kind of, when we do mitzvot, we create the olam haba of ours. That's why that our connection is higher, because we are kind of creating where we are in olam haba is where we get the benefits, or we no longer can. The truth is, we can make changes up there, but like technically saying, because over there we cannot create that kind of connection anymore, then we're not creating more. Only here we can create a better tomorrow. And is that why we are more connected to Hashem?
No. Let's stay very, very laser focused here. I always tell you guys, remember why you always have to know what a chapter in Tanya is doing. You have to know its point, okay? It's not a conversation starter. The Alter Rebbe didn't sit down for coffee with you and say, what do you want to schmooze about? We have one point here. What's our one point?
Oneness with Hashem.
But why? What I mean is, why are we talking about that? Why is he bringing this up? Why are we talking about oneness with Hashem? Well, meditating was, or maybe it's working, but it's just not working fast enough. And so we need to take a perspective that's going to motivate us, okay? We already know what motivates us, the threat of, God forbid, disconnecting from God. So right now, he's explaining to you what it is that you have when you do Hashem's will, and he's about to explain what you lose, God forbid, when you don't do Hashem's will. Okay? So he's explaining what it is that we have at the moment when we choose to do Hashem's will. That's what he's selling you on. He's not selling you on anything else. None of the other ramifications of Torah observance are of interest right now. The only point he's trying to make is, at the moment you choose to learn Torah or to do a mitzvah, you are choosing to be at one with Hashem. And now he's just explaining the particularities of that oneness. And in this particular sentence, he's contrasting that oneness with the degree of divine awareness that the spiritual entities in higher worlds are able to experience. Now, the next yeah? Wait, somebody want to go into
I think it's a different question, so maybe you want to finish.
Okay, fine. All right, yeah.
Okay, my only question is, I understand what you're saying in terms of the seeing it from the perspective, but isn't that essentially saying that since the only way we can grasp the Torah is because it sounds like it's creating a manifestation of limitation, that's why we can see it, we can connect to it because it's not this, energy.
So the end of chapter 4, he spoke about how the infinite wisdom was codified and condensed within this finite discussion of somebody's cow was gored by somebody's ox. Okay, but at the end of chapter 4, we explained that when you're studying Torah, it's not like a dumbed down version of infinite truth. It is the infinite truth.
It is the infinite truth, but in a way that we can.
But yet, the best of both worlds, in a way that a finite mind can actually understand it. Okay. The next question that you would have to ask at this point is, you would say to me, well, hold on a second. You're making a claim that our level of oneness with God that we have when we learn Torah, if I open up a Kitzur Shulchan Aruch and I learn a line, I'm experiencing a greater degree of oneness with God than any angel in the highest heavens. That has not been my experience. That's the obvious next question, right?
Well, we don't know, because we don't know what that experience is like.
So, very good. So the next thing that he says, the afagav di'ihu leichazichulo, even though you don't see this. This is an expression from the Gemara. It talks about a story where different people had different reactions to a divine revelation, and the explanation is that, or rather, different people had different reactions, and yet somehow those who were not prophets somehow sensed that which the prophet sensed, even though they didn't know what they were sensing. So the Gemara explains that basically sometimes you don't see something, but your mazel, like mazel tov. Mazel literally is from the word noizel, which means to drip. It means the source of your soul on high, that's sort of higher than embodiment, and it drips down, as it were. So even though you don't see, meaning even though your consciousness doesn't behold what's going on, your mazel does. Umeshum hachi, and he says in brackets, and precisely because you can't understand on a conscious level what's happening, yachol lisbael, that's why you're able to endure it. Mishum delay chazi, because you don't consciously see it. Masha ein kain ba'elyenim, not so in the spiritual worlds, where they do see it and they would see it, so therefore they can't have it because it's an inherent contradiction. That degree of divine oneness, if they were to see it, they would no longer exist. It would completely overwhelm their existence. So precisely because we do not consciously appreciate the level of oneness that we are experiencing when we learn Torah, that's why we're able to have that level of oneness and not be overwhelmed. Yeah.
I don't really understand this concept of encompassing all worlds.
What do you want to know about the encompassing? Because this is really not the place where we get deep into encompassing. Well,
I just even the.
on the most simple level,
Yeah, I don't understand. He's not.
let me ask you, I have a question for you. What's bigger, God or the world?
Same thing.
No, Hashem.
Hashem is we said that Hashem and the world are one. There's no separation.
Hashem and
Yeah, but the world is finite,
then they're beyond
and God is infinite.
Right.
So there's got to be a certain amount of infinity that doesn't fit in the finite. That's the sovev.
Okay, because it's condensed. Right?
No, it's not condensed. All of the world is God, but all of God is not the world. Okay?
Rabbi,
Yeah.
so that's a tremendous paradox.
Everything's a paradox.
I know. So, but if you think about it, it's like mind-boggling because the awareness that you want to create is actually like you can't because it would overwhelm you,
Right.
right?
Right.
So, by learning the Torah, you actually are connecting to Hashem, and you are achieving awareness, but you're not aware that
You
you're
can't
aware.
see it or feel it, because then you would be.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Which is why we're learning about it, and we're taking the Alter Rebbe's word for it.
And why this world is so hard.
Hmm?
And that's why it's so
That's
hard.
why the world is hard, yeah, because we don't see this stuff. Yeah. So, also what gives us an opportunity to be partners.
You don't exactly.
Okay, let's continue. I'd love to finish this chapter. Uvezeh yuvan lama gadla me'ed milas ha'esek b'teira yesem ekol ha'mitzvos afilu tefila mitfila shehi yichod ilmeis al yenim. Now we can understand another thing, why learning Torah is considered greater than doing any of the mitzvahs. Remember we spoke about there's two levels. There's the merkava, being a chariot to Hashem when you do Hashem's mitzvah. And then there's the oneness when you align your perspective with Hashem's perspective through learning Torah. So he says, now we understand why learning Torah is even greater than doing mitzvahs. Now he, in brackets, says, V'ha demisha ein teirasim unasei tzarech lahafsik, hainu miyachad amafsik mevatel belav hachi. He says, I just said that learning Torah is even greater than davening. Well, then how come the halacha is that you don't just keep learning? How come you stop learning and you go daven? He says, because you stop learning anyway. You stop to eat. You stop to go to the bathroom. You stop to go check on your wife and kids. So, you stop anyway, so you could stop to daven too, certainly. And with this reflection, any intelligent person can draw upon himself an immense awe when he goes to learn Torah. When he meditates. How his soul and its garments, which are in his mind and in his mouth, how his soul and its garments are becoming completely one with Hashem's will and the light, the infinite light, which is revealed in Hashem's will. We're talking about a level of light that compared to it, all of the worlds, even the spiritual worlds, are nothing. A level of light that doesn't even invest itself within the worlds, not even the higher worlds, but rather remains soivev, surrounds them, in an encompassing manner. The worlds receive only a condensed glimmer of light that they can tolerate. But at that moment of learning, we are united with this higher light that cannot be contained within worlds, even spiritual worlds. V'zehu shekosov. Vitzivenu Hashem es kol hachukim ha'ela leyira es Hashem v'geimen. This is what it means. And Hashem commanded us, all of His laws, these laws, to fear Him. Meaning to say that the very fact that we have this command, and if we reflect upon the nature of the command, that itself will instill awe. Brackets. Va'al yira gedela zu amru im ein chachma ein yira. Now, regarding this level of awe, it says, if there is no wisdom, there is no awe. You're familiar that there are two formulations of this statement in Torah. There's im ein chachma ein yira and im ein yira ein chachma. In fact, I believe the first is the im ein yira ein chachma. If there's no awe, there's no wisdom. If there's no wisdom, there's no awe. It's like, how do you get a job? You have to have experience. But how do you have experience? You have to have had a job.
It actually says the beginning of wisdom is the fear of Hashem.
But how do you get started if it says, without wisdom, there's no awe. Without awe, there's no wisdom. Or vice versa. There's no awe. Well, it's a loop, so you could enter it anywhere in the loop. So he explains it by saying there's actually two levels of awe. Obviously, you can't say that there's something that you need A in order to attain B, and you need B in order to attain A. Then it would be impossible to even get started. He says there are two levels of yira. There's the yira that's prerequisite to acquiring wisdom, and then there's the yira that's acquired once one has wisdom. So he says here in brackets, and he'll elaborate on that actually much later in Tanya. He says in brackets, Imein chochma in yira, v'ha-Torah nikras etzla tara ledarta. Torah is called the gate to the house. That's Aramaic. Kameshin is bar b'makim like it's explained elsewhere. Elsewhere it's explained in Tanya. But the point is, the initial awe of doing mitzvos, meaning you have enough impulse control and self-discipline to do mitzvos and to learn Torah, that's a lower level. But then we're talking about a higher level of awe that you get from doing mitzvos and appreciating exactly what it is that you are involved in. So that's why Torah is called the gate to the house, that through doing the mitzvahs, you'll appreciate how awesome that oneness with Hashem really is. Okay? So anyways, the point is, right now, he's not trying to instill you with enough awe to do a mitzvah or to learn Torah. To the contrary, he's saying, think about the mitzvahs and the Torah that you're already involved in, and that will instill you with an even higher level of awe, because you'll be like blown away by this thing that you're involved in. Okay? Ella, dalav kol mecha sovelda. But not every brain can tolerate this. Meaning, no brain can tolerate this. No, you can't wrap your mortal mind around this. Yira kazu, such a level of awe. Ach gam man de lo sovel meiche klal yirazu, but even a mind that cannot wrap its mind around this awe, le mineva le miktasa, not even a part of it. Why not mipnei prisos erech nafshe b'shorsha mekeda, because of the low level of his soul root. B'medregas tachtenes dasis ristasiya, he's coming from a lower soul origin, and of course you'll consult chapter 2 where it explains that even when we say a soul is a lower soul, ultimately it also comes from the higher source as well, but you'll have to look back in chapter 2 for that. Ein yirem akevis be lemaisa, yet a lack of that awe will not practically hold him back from doing it, kameshi is bar lakaman, like it's explained elsewhere. So even if you're not able to wrap your mind around that awe, or the idea that leads to that awe, it's fine. You'll just realize that it's too big of an idea to understand, and it doesn't prevent you from doing that awesome thing that you would be totally in awe of if you could wrap your mind around it. The point is here, he's selling you on what a wild, crazy oneness is happening every time you learn Torah and do mitzvahs. And when you hear this, you're like, wow, I never appreciated it in that way. I thought I was doing something nice for Hashem. I didn't realize I was becoming one with Hashem. That's what he's explaining to you. Now, in the next chapter, chapter 24, which I thought we were learning today, he says, and now, here's the scary hour. You're going to hear a scary. No, this wasn't scary. This was awesome. This was awesome, not scary. Scary is, he says, Now imagine what happens to you when you choose the opposite. Not just when you don't do it. Let's say, what happens when you willingly align yourself with opposing God's will? Ooh, I don't want to make fun of it, but that's scary. So next chapter is a scary chapter. If chapter 23 is selling you on the glory of oneness with Hashem by doing mitzvos and learning Torah, chapter 24 is going to scare you about how awful it is. And by the way, chapter 24, when it says how scary it is, does it say anything about Gehenna over there? No, because you know what's scarier than Gehenna? Disconnection from Hashem. Yeah, that's right. You guys are a very refined crowd. Very good. Glad you understand that. I'm not saying Gehenna's not scary, but what's scarier? What's scarier than your wife yelling at you? Not talking to you. I mean, if you love your wife. So if you love Hashem, then being disconnected from Hashem is scarier than Gehenna. If you don't love Hashem, then I guess Gehenna is more of a motivation than being disconnected.